Okay, so here we are. We're the normal sort of state of affairs of an engine rebuild, to some extent, two steps forward, one step back. I have already put the Conrods, as we've seen, on the crankshaft, and then I've changed my mind and we've come back again. Now, what have I changed my mind about? I've changed my mind about replacing the big end bolts. Now, the thing about big end bolts is that they are designed to stretch, and that's why it's vital that you only do them up to the exact torque, which is 18 foot-pounds in our case, because it just stretches them enough so that they're optimum. They're not loose, so things aren't going to come apart, but they're not so tight and stretched that the bolt's going to snap. And generally, I don't change them. I have once, on an engine rebuild before, I have once changed them because I didn't like the look of them and the threads were a bit knackered and one thing and another. But generally, I don't change them. However, the problem with these big end bolts is that if they have been over tightened in the past, and don't forget these are nearly 50 years old now. If they've been over tightened and they've been maybe stretched a bit too much, then they're weak. They could be weak anyway. There's the argument. They're 50 years old, so you might want to change them. On the other hand, you could say everything's 50 years old. Let's change everything. It's that sort of balance. Do we change the Conrods or not change the Conrods? Do we change the big end bolts or not? Because the other downside, of course, is I always worry about inferior parts. Because you think, oh, well, I'll change. They're a bit old, I'll change. And sometimes you get the new parts, and you think, well, there's no way I'm putting that on because, it's just rubbish. Whereas these happen to have come up, and I know that these are new old stock. So they're actually 50 years old, I think, but I know that they're good, high quality. And it's one of those. Someone wrote in and said, aren't you going to change the big end bolts? And I said, no, I don't normally do it, which I don't. I've never changed them on my bikes. I've changed them on one engine that I rebuilt. But, it's letting sleeping dogs lie. You can disturb things. And, what do you change? What don't you change? But these came up, new old stock. They're not that expensive. They're £2.50 each. And this chap had written in. And then after he wrote in, I couldn't stop thinking, oh, maybe I should, oh, my God, maybe, if the big end bolt does snap, then the whole engine rebuild is for nothing, which is true. It's the same for most things. So anyway, because it was on my mind and one thing or another, I thought, oh, bloody hell, if I don't change them now, I'll change them. I'll change them now. Before I put the bloody crankcase in and crankshaft in, let's change them. So it's one of those. Do I recommend changing these? It's one of those. Yes, no. Do you change the Conrods? Do you have a rebore, etc., etc.? There are some things that I'd always change. I'd probably always change the drive sprocket, the gearbox drive sprocket. I'd always probably change the clutch plate, mainly because they're both such a huge amount of work to get to them, and they're always pretty worn out anyway. Things like the Conrods, the big end bolts, it's one of those. But these are new old stock. The other problem I've got is, letting sleeping dogs lie. You can damage things by just messing about with them, or sometimes it's better just to leave things alone. And like we did with the crankcase oil feed. Anyway, so I'm changing these. So all I've done is these go in there. The old ones, you literally just tap them out, poof, and out they come. Now I'll see if I'm going to look at the camera. Right. Now, I don't know if you can see, I'm going to turn this, and you see the head is like not on straight. The head of the bolt here is, if we look at the top of the bolt there, it's near to the bolt, the head. And on the other side, you'll see the head is miles away from the stem of the bolt. Yeah? Like the stem isn't in the middle of that top section of the bolt. And that, on these, I think I said previously it was square because it is on some, but on these, that's how it works. So the head isn't central. So when it goes in, that stops this bolt from turning when you do up the nuts at the bottom. So that means this hole is also off center. So it's vitally important to make sure that you get the sort of the narrow bit of the head aligns with the narrow bit of the conrod, which is towards that side of the conrod. And it's also vitally important that we don't get any bits underneath the head at all. We need to get that really nice and clean, any bits of grit, because of course we're going to torque this down and we want it to be the right torque. And we make sure absolutely there's no bits of grit on the top of the conrod, so that when we torque things down, we know it's tightened properly. So then we just slip the head in. I'll try and orientate it. We want the narrow bit like towards the stem of the conrod. And then I'm going to use mallet with a soft end, because obviously the last thing I want to do is hit the conrod itself. And just tap it down and tap it there 3/4 of the way home to there. And that is where we can still turn it. So I'm just going to turn, and then as it goes in, I just make sure that I have got it in the right orientation, because if you try and force it and it's in the wrong, you haven't got that head in the right place, you're going to make a right mess of this conrod. There, I'm just going to tap it home. There we are. I'll do the one on the other side. Clean the bottom of the head. Make sure it's going to sit really really nice on that conrod. There's no bits of grit or dirt, and obviously these are new old stock, these ones, so there's a little bit of gunge on them. Make sure that's totally clean. Orientate it in roughly the right place, but we can turn it later on. Tap it down, making sure we don't hit the conrod. Bit more there, so then we can turn it. Make sure, there we go, and that's the one that's gone straight in. So there we go. And I'm going to do the same with the other conrods. Then again, I've bought more new big end nuts, because even though the nuts we had were new, I've used them once, and that means that the locking bit at the top of the washer is already weakened by me unscrewing them again. So I don't want to take the risk of reusing them, even though they're new, because the actual locking part of the nut will be weakened. It won't be as strong. And obviously I don't want these nuts coming undone, even with Loctite. So there's only, again, about £2 each. Why risk it? So even though I've got new big end nuts, I've got some more completely unused ones, which I'm going to reuse, because obviously this is the heart of the engine. You don't want any doubt here at all. Okay, so I'm going to carry on now. I'm going to put the, I've done that rod, I've just done this rod. I'm going to do the next rod, and then reassemble the whole lot as we did before, but this time with new big end bolts in. Okay. I've had a slight hiatus. There's been a gap in these videos because I've found a problem, an anomaly that I've never come across before, and that is that I was just I put the new big end bolts on, and I put the new nuts on and so on, and I suddenly thought that everything was fine, and I suddenly thought, well, it's 18 foot-pounds the torque, and I thought, I haven't checked that for a while, I better just check it. And basically I've checked it, and I've got 4 manuals. I've got the factory manual for the T150, I've got the Haynes manual for both bikes, there's an article by the sort of triple guru Jack Sheemans, and then finally there's the factory workshop manual for the T160. Now I have a look through, and 3 manuals all say that to do the big end nuts up to 18 foot-pounds, but the 4th manual says to do them up to 22, which I've never noticed before. The T150 workshop manual says 18, Jack Sheeman says 18, the Haynes manual says 18, but the T160 factory manual says 22. So I've just spent a few days ringing around people and getting advice from anyone I can ask, and no one seems to have a definitive answer. The general consensus is to leave them at 18, and so that's what I've done. I've given them a generous 18, so they're probably like 19. But it's just weird. It's in the, I'll post some pictures now of the different manuals and showing the different torque settings. No one seems to know. There's no sort of answer like, oh yeah, for the T160 they changed it, they changed the big end bolts or whatever it was. It's the same part number for the big end bolts for the T150 to T160. So why they would be a higher torque, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's why there's been a bit of a gap, because obviously we need to get this right. You get that wrong, and you build the whole engine and the big end bolt comes loose or whatever, then we're in trouble. Or if it's too tight, it will seize. Anyway, so I've settled on 18, well, nearer 19 now, and that's why there's been a gap. Okay, so with the crankshaft now finally done, that's taken a bit of time, we're now ready to prepare the casing, the crankcases to put the crankshaft in. There are 3 crankcases on a Trident. So there's a central crankcase that the crankcase fits in with the main bearings, and then there's a timing case, and then there's a drive side case. So like most twins, etc., there's just 2 cases and they clamp together. On a Trident there's 3. There's a central one and then 2 either side. So we're going to prep the cases first, get them all ready, then we'll put the then we'll get the crankshaft in. 2 steps forward, 1 step back.